Okay, Alexander, for this story, we're going to be a bit cautious because it is, wow, is it an explosive story? But it could upset many of the censors at big tech and many people in the U.S. government, specifically the Democrats, and maybe even some Republicans, maybe many Republicans. But we had Tucker Carlson on his show last night. He opened up with a Revolver article, which makes the claim that the FBI helped organize and coordinate much of the unrest that we saw on January 6th. I don't need to tell everyone that's watching this video that this is an absolute bombshell report. This is explosive. I will say this, the Revolver article is an excellent article. It's well sourced. It doesn't go into any type of conspiracy stuff either. It stays on the facts, and it doesn't say that the FBI, for certain, it knows the FBI was a co-conspirator. Let's use that word. Was a co-conspirator in the 1/6 events, but it lays out a lot of facts that probably need more lead to more questions, and we need more answers because there's a lot in this Revolver report that it really raises a lot of questions as to what really happened on the 6th of January. So Alexander, let's get into this, and like I said, we'll be a bit careful in our language. But I will put a link to this Revolver article down below. I recommend if you guys are interested in this story, definitely read it. It's a fantastic piece.
Indeed. Can I just say also, I mean, we'll be careful in our language and careful in our assessments too. But I do want to say something about Revolver, which is that I have been reading them. And the thing that struck me about them is, yes, obviously, they have their own, particular perspective. But firstly, their articles do tend to be well sourced, and on a lot of occasions they've come out true. So I'd say it's a very reliable source. I mean, I would say, I mean, as a news outlet, I would say that it's definitely a reliable one. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Revolver. Now, firstly, what Revolver is saying is that there are these three groups. The media and the FBI refer to them as militias. I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to mention their names, but they're the same organizations that everybody's been hearing about. They're referred to as right-wing militias by the media. I'm far from convinced, by the way, that that's true in any real sense. I'm not even really convinced that they're actually organizations. But it discusses the possibility that they've been infiltrated by the FBI, and it makes the point that a surprisingly large number of people who appear to have been involved in 1/6 are mentioned or referred to in various indictments, criminal indictments, which have appeared as unindicted co-conspirators. Now, that is the last point that is most interesting. Now, let's deal with the first point. Whether or not these entities really are militias in any real sense, they are obviously objects of interest by US law enforcement, including, of course, the FBI, and it is standard practice and entirely appropriate and proper practice by law enforcement agencies to infiltrate informers into those kind of objects of interest, those kind of organizations or groups. There's been nothing inappropriate in that. There would be nothing remarkable in that fact. Now, it is a major leap, however, to say that informers operating within these organizations are provocateurs. That is a huge step beyond them being merely informers. But you have to look at the fact that there are a large number of people in these indictments, not named, who are referred to as unindicted co-conspirators. Now, why are they unindicted co-conspirators? To explain to our viewers, an unindicted co-conspirator is somebody who is an accomplice to an alleged crime, but for some reason the prosecuting authority, in this case the Justice Department, has decided that though they are accomplices, they will not be charged. Now that may be because they have some kind of legal protections, or it could be because they have protections because they are police informers. I mean, that is entirely common. Now, given the central role to some of the events which took place on 1/6, that some of these unindicted co-conspirators appear from the published indictments to have had, Revolver and others quite reasonably asked the question, why are these people unindicted? Could they be informers? Could they be FBI or police informers of some sort? And given the very close proximity they seem to have had to the events of 1/6, could they have been more than just informers? Might they have been provocateurs? Now, I want to stress again, this is to a great extent speculative, and there's a huge leap from being an informer to being a provocateur. But informers are well-known and accepted things in law enforcement practice. Provocateurs, by the way, emphatically are not. That is unacceptable and almost certainly, well, definitely illegal practice. But it is questions that arise from the fact that there are so many unindicted co-conspirators named in these indictments, or mentioned in these indictments, not named, mentioned in these indictments, and that they seem to have such an important role in the events that are being described. That begs the question of who these people are. Are they FBI informers? Are they people who have come to some kind of deal, maybe? That's always a possibility to bear in mind. Have they made some kind of a deal with the Justice Department, which means that they will provide evidence against others in return for immunity? That's always a possibility. Or are they actually provocateurs? Well, I think we can ask these questions. They're valid questions. I think they should be asked. And it was really rather interesting to see that when Christopher Wray, who is the director of the FBI, was asked questions by, I think it was Senator Klobuchar, he was extremely, extremely evasive about providing clear-cut answers to these sort of questions, which perhaps he should do. If they'd simply been people who'd been granted immunity in return for their evidence, I would have thought he'd be able to say that. Interesting that he didn't. So that's all we can say at the moment. It's an interesting point to think about and discuss. But let me say again, planting informers in organisations that are objects of interest and which might be seen as a law enforcement threat is standard practice. Having them act as actual provocateurs is not. Some of the actions of these unindicted co-conspirators in the indictments does open up and lead to some very interesting and important questions. Questions which I think should be asked and should certainly be answered by the Justice Department and the FBI.
Right, that is the million-dollar question. Now people are asking, Tucker Carlson is asking, and Revolver News is asking. And just to make it, just to break it down in a more simple type of train of thought, in essence, what we need to know is the FBI, without a doubt, Christopher Wray admitted as much. The FBI did have informers in these organizations, which is common practice, like you say. So we know that there were people planted in these various groups. What we need to know is, like you said, did these people in these groups, did they just monitor these groups and then report back to the FBI? Or did they, for lack of a better word, did they egg on these groups leading up to the events of the 6th of January? That's an important question. That is the $1 million question right there. And what Revolver News is using in order to perhaps make the claim that these were not just informants or agents embedded in these organizations, but actually did provoke many of these groups that they were embedded with, is the first fact that you said, that they are unindicted co-conspirators, which is, and we don't have an explanation, which is strange. We need an explanation.
We need an explanation.
Okay. And then they also use the case which happened a few months before this January 6th, the events of January 6th, and that was with Gretchen Whitmore and what went down in Michigan with this bogus kidnapping hoax, where in that instance you had a much more contained situation, less people involved, but you did have FBI, from what I understand, according to Revolver News and according to Tucker Carlson's reporting, you did have an FBI agent, informant, who was embedded with these they were kind of like Keystone Cop kidnappers in a way, really strange group of people. But anyway, there was an informant or someone associated with the FBI with that group of people. And you have the same, and that person, from what we understand, was provoking the situation. So Revolver is kind of using, like you said, the unindicted co-conspirators, plus the fact that this was done in the past, and these informants were provoking in the past. So it's not a huge stretch to say they would do the same thing in this scenario. And it's a valid claim made by Revolver News, where we need those answers.
Absolutely. Now, can I just say, there are situations where police and law enforcement agencies will set up what you could call stings. I mean, they infiltrate a criminal group, and they arrange, or they direct through their informers within the criminal group to engage in a particular crime, which will then lead to everybody being rounded up and arrested, and that will then enable the law enforcement agency and the prosecuting authority to bring charges. But that is, again, stings are things that have to be done very carefully, because, of course, inciting people who might not be in any way intending to do anything illegal, inciting them to do something illegal when they are not part of any sort of a criminal group, which is, as I said, what provocation tactics are all about. That is completely different, and that's a very serious matter, and that's definitely illegal. Now, can I just say, it doesn't just happen in the United States. There haven't just been examples of that sort of thing in the United States. Similar things have happened in Britain, and there's been a big scandal about that in Britain, in which the British police infiltrated various peace activist groups and tried to basically direct them, and all kinds of scandals arose, and there's now legislation being talked about that have been largely created as a result of that. So the thing that, for me, makes this particular story so interesting is that when you look at the indictments, and, you know, I'm taking this now more from Revolver, from the Revolver story. When you look at the indictments, apparently it suggests that some of the most aggressive people involved behind the events of 1/6 are these unindicted co-conspirators. And that is where the big question mark is. Because if they were so close to these events, in fact, possibly central to these events, what exactly was their role, and who are they, and why are they not indicted? Now, I'm not going to answer these questions, but I think posing the questions demands the answer. we need to know.
Yeah, it goes back. Were these people, to what extent were they egging on these militia groups? How
Exactly.
far did they take it? Like I said, were they just monitoring and reporting? Or, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, how do you measure this? How do you measure their participation in the events of 1/6, these informants or these people embedded with these militias? Is there a way for investigators to figure out exactly to what extent these people were provoking, if they were
Absolutely.
provoking in
Absolutely.
any case? How would you go about it? Because we also have to point out to our viewers that we have thousands and thousands of hours of videotape that is not being released as well. So there is a lot of there is a blackout related to this story, and maybe those thousands of hours of media tapes of tapes at the scene would clear things up. I don't know. How do you measure it?
Oh,
how do we figure out? Informant A did what?
Yeah, I mean, you can measure it. I mean, provided the evidence is there, incitement is a crime. I mean, bear in mind they try to attach incitement to the president, to Donald Trump, but incitement is a crime. There are actual things that make up incitement, and you can use the law to look at what people said and did and work out whether they were actually engaging in outright incitement, inciting others to commit crimes which perhaps they were engaging in themselves. And of course, conspiracy is also a crime. So I mean, if they were sitting down and working out with other people things to do which would have amounted to a crime, well, conspiracy is also a crime. So there are lots of levels that you can absolutely do this. And again, and I stress again from the Revolver News article, it seems that some of these unindicted co-conspirators were so close to these events that incitement and conspiracy look extremely possible. Bear in mind that if they are unindicted co-conspirators, that is in effect a virtual admission by the Justice Department that they have carried out the elements of a crime. It's just that there's been a decision not to indict them. So I mean, they are, and remember, co-conspirators means a conspiracy of which they are part of. So that already creates a nexus, a sort of connection of criminal intention that, for some reason, might be because, as I said, these people have some kind of an immunity deal, or it could be because they're informers, or it could be for some other reason. But it already seems as if they are perhaps guilty of crimes, and that it's just that there's been a decision for some reason unknown, or at least not disclosed, not to charge them for it.
Yeah, but if these people are embedded with these militia groups, and I'm using the word militia for lack of a better word, if they're embedded with them, I mean, can't we find out, or shouldn't the American people have the answers as to who these people were? Were they informants? Were they consultants? Like, was it a Stephen Halper type of situation? Were they on contract, or were they actually employed FBI agents, like you said, involved in a sting type of operation? I mean, shouldn't we understand what the relationship was between the government and these people who were embedded with these groups? And once we understand the relationship, then the next logical step would be to say, okay, given their relationship with the government, whatever it was, how did they take things too far? Did they incite? Did they participate? And I'm sure that could be searched out on surveillance video if they participated. That would be pretty easy to find if we did have those thousands of hours of video. I mean, it seems like the pieces could be put together if Christopher Wray and the FBI were a bit more forthcoming to answer what I feel is the first simple question, i.e., look, we had 10 agents, they were embedded, they were employed by the FBI, these people were trained by us, they worked with us, here's what they reported. Or these were Stefan Halper type of people. They were, people we've been working with for 10 years, and this is how they reported to us, etc. Or these were informants from within the group that we courted, and we, put them on our side, so to speak. We turned them. I mean, we should be able to get this most basic question answered, shouldn't we?
Well, of course we should. I mean, this is absolutely fundamental. I mean, given how important the events of 1/6 were to the political life of the United States and to the whole situation in the United States today, of course we should have that information. And there's lots and lots of questions to ask. If the law enforcement agencies, for example, had people within these organizations, within these militias, as you like, then, what information did the FBI have in advance of 1/6? I mean, what were these people doing? I mean, we need to know that. Absolutely, we need to know all of that. We need to know that the FBI fully needs to come forward and provide us with all this information so that we can understand better what the events of 1/6 really were all about. I mean, otherwise we have a completely incomplete picture, and a quite possibly, a completely distorted one. So of course we need to know. And in a democracy based on the rule of law, it is absolutely essential that that kind of information is provided. It should also be provided, by the way, and in addition, to the defendants who are facing these kind of charges. I mean, if they were incited to do things, I'm just, again, saying this as a possibility. If they were incited to do criminal things, which they might not otherwise have done by people who, it turns out, were government agents, then that is a fact that ought to be shared with their lawyers. I mean, that's an essential point to say. I mean, that is
aren't they at a weakness?
Yeah. Sorry?
Aren't they at a weakness? That's a great point. I mean, if I'm in one of these groups, and I cut you off there, but if I'm in one of these groups, because you made a good point, and at first I'm just going there to protest, to just pass the day, have a good time, say in DC, but you have a trained professional embedded in my group of friends. I mean, a trained professional. These people know spycraft. They know how. They just know how to do things. They know how to incite riots. They know how to move crowds. They know how to manipulate people and emotions. These are trained professionals. If I'm in a prison in DC, can't I make the legal argument that, look, guys, I mean, this guy knew how to push my buttons?
Well, of course they could. I mean, this is absolutely fundamental. I mean, if you take incitement up to a certain level and there's a degree of manipulation there, then, I mean, it's not impossible. In fact, it's quite likely that a jury, being informed of that kind of information, might decide to acquit. I mean, it is that fundamental. So, of course, people should know. The defense lawyers should know. The defendants themselves should know. The American people in general should know. Congress should know. Everybody should know. It's absolutely essential. It's basic to the rule of law, democracy, and due process. And that's why the FBI and the Justice Department need, if the United States is still functioning properly, to disclose all this information to us. And that's why Revolver, even if, one can, whatever, the actual facts, at least they've done a service by bringing this whole question out. Why are some people being charged and others who seem to be at least as heavily involved, and perhaps more so than others, why are those others not being charged? What did the US government know? What was the role of these people? What kind of information were they providing? Have they done deals with the Justice Department? what are those deals? I mean, all of this kind of information we need to know.
Yeah, but if these are people that did deals, then you assume that they're not employed by the FBI.
Well, absolutely, but I mean, I'm not making any assumptions because I don't have the information.
If it was
to
a
make
deal,
those.
yeah.
I mean,
right,
I don't have those assumptions. But all I'm saying is that there's lots of questions and no answers at the moment, and one again wonders why. And I come back to the original point that I started with in this program, and which Revolver News made by pointing out the story of what had happened with the other the other group where there'd been informers embedded, which is that it is entirely standard practice and very common for law enforcement agencies to infiltrate informers or to court informers in organisations that are objects of interest. I would be astonished if these three militia groups, I call them militia groups, did not have informers embedded in them. So what was their role? It's not unreasonable to ask these questions. On the contrary, it's essential to ask these questions precisely for the reasons which we discussed, including the issues of due process, rule of law, understanding what happened on 1/6, and all the rest.
Okay, so if we go off of Russiagate and what happened in Russiagate, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're not going to get the thousands of hours of surveillance video footage. We're not going to understand who these people were, whether they were informants, employees, government agents. We're not going to get it.
No.
I mean, we didn't get really any information as to who the shady characters involved in Russiagate were, and we're talking about much less people involved than the 1/6 events. And for the 1/6 events in Russiagate, at least we had some names. We had a Halper, we had a Mifsud. In this case, we don't even have a name, any names. We just have person number 1, person number 2, number 3. That's how Revolver lays it out as well. Informant 1, 2, 3. We don't know. So we're not going to get anything, I imagine. The narrative is too useful for the Democrats.
Well, absolutely. That's entirely right. The way to get around this, actually, because you're quite right. I mean, the Justice Department and the FBI are not going to share this information, even though they should share this information. The people who ought to be working to get this information out are the oversight agencies, the oversight people in Congress, in the various committees in Congress which have oversight roles. Well, we know who controls them at the moment, so there's no chance of anything coming out there. Perhaps, possibly, if things change after the congressional elections in 2022, you might start to see these committees starting to take a more active role in trying to find out what happened. But I'm not holding my breath. And of course, 2022 is a long, long, long way away. There is one other possibility which should not be overlooked, which is, as I said, these indictments are going to lead, in some cases at least, to trials. And it's possible that defense lawyers will insist on information being provided through the process of disclosure or discovery. But again, that very much depends on what the judges in the particular cases are prepared to do. And again, as we saw in Russiagate, some judges take their role, their concerns about due process a lot more seriously than other judges do. I'm being very careful in my words.
Yeah. I wonder if that's why they're keeping so many of these people in the DC jail in limbo. They seem to be in like a legal limbo.
Well, I'm sure that is, and that's a major issue in itself. Because, I mean, people should be charged. If people are charged, they should be tried. You can't keep them in detention, indefinitely. I mean, that is, to my mind, a violation of their constitutional rights. And it's, again, a question of concern that it's not, nobody's bringing this up at the moment. But the whole point about justice, due process, is that justice should be prompt and fair and open and transparent. Otherwise, it's not justice.
Yeah, I imagine they may be afraid of discovery in a legal trial. Or they want to delay it as far out as possible.
Well, indeed. But as I said, then that creates a whole set of other problems, human rights, constitutional problems, that are going to be growing. By the way, the Russians apparently, just adding in parenthesis, apparently intend to bring this issue, a delay, up in the event that, you know, the United States tries to put them on the spot in the Geneva Summit on human rights violations. So in its own interests, in the interests of its conduct of foreign policy, the United States needs to get its act together on this, because it is starting to tread on very, very thin ice.
Yeah. The more you hold these people in prison, the more questions start coming out.
Absolutely, and the more and the more comments will start to be made, and not just obviously in the United States, but around the world too.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there, guys. Look for us on Odyssey, on BitChute, Super U, the free speech video platform, and join us on Locals. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch. 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS. Everything is down below in the description box. Take care.